Hello and welcome to the 741 channel. Thank you for stopping by. Today I'm going to work on installing a CB radio and a 2-meter ham radio in my 2007 Chevy Suburban. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to install the antennas first and then put the radios in. So in my previous vehicles, what I've done with my 2-meter radio installations is I've actually put Nmo mounts on the roof of the vehicle, drilled a hole right in the sheet metal, put the antenna in that way, and it's worked great. But this vehicle's a little bit nicer than some of the ones I've owned in the past, and I can't bring myself to drill any holes in the sheet metal. So I think this time I'm going to use some mounting brackets instead of drilling holes. Performance of the antenna may suffer just a little bit, but I think it'll be good enough for what I use it for. So here's a look at the brackets that I'm going to be using. This one over here that I've already opened is the one that is used just for CB radio antennas. This one over here is actually the same exact bracket, comes with the same coax connection, but they also throw in this Nmo Mount and LMR 200 style coax. Now the reason I went with this is because I have an existing Nmo Mount antenna that I want to use on this vehicle, and also I like the idea of having the lower loss coax for VHF frequencies. And at some point in the future, I may end up switching that 2-meter only radio for a dual band 2-meter and 70 centimeter radio. And definitely at 70 centimeter frequencies, we want lower loss coax. One of the things I like about these kits from Wolcott Radio is that they have this very small coax connector on the end that needs to be fished through the body of the vehicle. That way, I don't have to drill a large hole to accept the PL259 connector. Included with the kit, of course, is the adapter to adapt this style connector to a PL259. So these brackets are designed to fit in the gap between the hood and the fender on GM vehicles of this vintage. And specifically, the bracket is designed to mount on the driver's side of the vehicle because it's actually angled and tapered to fit the slope of the fender. And that'll allow the antenna to be straight up and down when it's finally mounted on the vehicle. But that's also the thing I don't like about this bracket. They didn't offer a bracket for the passenger side, and I was really hoping to put one of the antennas on the driver's side and one over on the passenger side. But because both of these brackets are tapered to fit the driver's side, I'm either going to have to do some modifications if I want to put an antenna on the passenger side, or just put both antennas on this side. I'm going to mount the first one, see what everything looks like, and then make a decision after that. So now I'm going to grab a 13mm socket and loosen up this bolt that was underneath that cover. Now I should be able to just slip the center part of this bracket underneath the bolt. So here's what the bracket looks like. It's sitting in here pretty level, and I double checked to make sure that when the hood closes there's no interference. So we should be good to go. Now for the hard part. I got to figure out how to get this coax into the inside. What I'm looking at is the inside of the driver's side door now. What you may be able to see up there is where the fender and the A-pillar and sort of the door all kind of come together, and you may be able to see daylight up through there. That's actually more or less right where the antenna bracket is now. So what I think I can do is fish the coax down through here behind the door hinge, and then I should be able to pop a hole in this grommet where the wires from the door go through, and then run my wires through there. So I've got the rubber boot popped off of the plastic inner part of this grommet system, and it looks like there's plenty of room. I should be able to poke a hole in the boot here and then run my wires through the rest of this grommet. So now I'm going to use a round file and try and open those holes up a little bit. So now I'm just going to fish the coax down behind the fender and the door hinges and into the grommet. Now, it's really hard to see the hole in the grommet, even though I've opened it up with a file. It's sort of closed back up and self-healed itself, so it should make a good tight seal around this coax. And there we go, it went right through. Now I can pass it through the inner part of the grommet and start fishing it through underneath the dashboard. So now what I'm going to do is start mounting the 2-meter antenna. Now, as I mentioned before, both of these brackets are designed to be on the driver's side, but We're looking at the passenger side fender now. I've already got the cover popped off of the cowl here, and I've actually taken the bolt out too. So if I set this bracket down and hold it against the sheet metal as if it were bolted in, hopefully you can tell in the camera that this is now pitched forward. So if I had an antenna on here, the antenna would also be pitched forward. So what I should be able to do is shim one side of the bottom lip of the bracket with these washers so that once it's all tightened down, the bracket is level. I'll give you guys a better look in the next clip, but I've just dropped the washers down in there. I'll put the bracket over top of everything and then bolt it down. Ah, you suck. Okay, so here's what it looks like fully installed. You can see my 2 washer shims under this side of the bracket. The bolt was plenty long enough. It's threaded down and the bracket is nice and tight, holding everything the way that it should. So here's the Nmo mount that I'm going to put on the bracket. Now first off, I'm going to unthread this part of it. And I'm also going to pull off this plastic shoulder washer. Now what I'm going to do is slip this part under the bracket, and you should be able to tell that the hole is quite a bit bigger than the post here. And that's where this shoulder washer comes in. I'm going to drop this down over the assembly so that the shoulder part of it goes through the hole in the bracket and centers everything in place. Once I've got that firmly seated down, I'm going to bring this piece back in and thread it over the top. Now these are made of brass. They're a little bit soft. And in the past, I've had trouble with cross-threading these, so I'm going to be real careful and make sure that I get it on there properly. Now, I've just got this top piece finger tight for now. There are some flats on here that you can use pliers on to tighten it a little more. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side that I did on the other side for the CB antenna. I'm going to run the coax down behind the door hinges. I'm going to poke some holes in the rubber boot where the wiring goes through under the dash and route the wire that way. So before I get the coax all routed under the dash, I realized I didn't tell you guys where I plan to put these radios. So even though this is a big vehicle, there's really not a lot of room here on the dashboard to mount any radios. So after thinking things over and trying to balance usability of the radios with convenience of having the family in here and not tripping over the radios, what I've decided to do is actually mount them inside the center console. So my plan is to mount the radios vertically in here, and then if I want to use them, I just open this up and I should be able to get at them. So there's a couple of drawbacks to having them mounted in here. Now obviously, if I want to use the radios, this cover will have to be open. Now the bigger concern for me is heat and airflow. Now, obviously, if the radios are in here, there's not going to be a ton of airflow getting to the radios, and they could heat up while I'm using them. It's probably not going to be a problem with the CB, since that's just a stock 4-watt radio. It's not going to generate a whole lot of heat when I'm using it, and 99% of the time I'll be using that one to receive anyway. But I do use my 2-meter radio quite a bit, so that one could get a little bit hot. But for now, I'm going to get back to routing the coax underneath the dash, and then behind the center console and up and through to here. So now what I'll do is I'll fish both coaxes through either side of the dashboard and bring them up here behind the console. I should be able to get down below the center console without any trouble. I'm going to pull this centerpiece out so that I can access under there and get everything up to here and then figure out where I'm going to drill my holes. To get this thing out, all I have to do is pull straight up on it and it pops right out. While routing the coax for the CB antenna here on the driver's side, I want to be careful that I don't interfere with any of the pedals or anything like that, not only for safety reasons, but also so the coax doesn't get pinched when anything is actuated. So I'm going to make sure that I route it up and behind all of this stuff to get to the back of the console over there. So next up, I need to start thinking about how I'm going to power these radios. One option is to run each of the power cords from each radio through the firewall like I did with the antenna wires and up to the battery, which is over here. So what I think I'm going to do instead is I'm going to route one heavier power wire from the battery to the inside of the vehicle and then connect up to this Anderson power pole distribution block that I have. Then what I can do is connect shorter power cables from each of the radios up to the distribution block. So the side that's going to connect up to the battery has these two big fuse blocks. So what I'm going to do is route the free end through, just like I did the antenna wire, through the grommet in the door and into the console. And then I can connect this side up to the battery when I'm ready. So I've got the wire roughly routed where I want it. So I've got a little bit of slack here at the battery so that I can make connections up here and tie the wire off neatly. You can see it runs behind the hood hinge and then down and follows the same path as the coax for the 2-meter antenna. You can see everything runs down here behind the door hinges and into the holes in the grommet. I need to pop these rubber boots back over the plastic inserts here. So what I had to do is pop the insert out of the door. I was able to just get a flat-headed screwdriver in behind here and push in on this tab so it would pop out. Now I should be able to work the boot back over the lip in the plastic and then pop it back into the opening here. Then once it comes into the vehicle, it kind of goes back here behind where the kick plate will be, and then up under here behind the carpet and this plastic shroud. And then it snakes behind the console and then up and through to here. So now what I'm going to do is crimp some Anderson power poles on this end of the wire and ring terminals on the battery end. So now I need to start thinking about how I'm going to route everything into the center part of the console. As you can see, I've got my drill here, and what I think I'm going to do is drill a hole way down here in the bottom corner of this side of the console. So if I put a hole in the lower part of that depression, I should be able to route everything right down here. So I've got the radios sort of mocked up in the console here. You can see that the CB radio I'm going to use is a President McKinley sideband radio, and the 2-meter radio I'm going to use is this Yaesu FT3200M. Now the first thing I did is I just kind of set the radios in here and I measured out their power cords, ran them through the hole that I drilled, cut them to length with a little bit of slack just in case I need it, and connected them up to my distribution block. Now the plan is to just coil up any excess slack and just kind of stuff it all sort of under here out of the way of the cup holder tray that's going to snap back in here. There should be plenty of room down under this plastic. I thought about mounting this in with either some double-sided tape or screws or something, but I think it'll be okay to just kind of float around in there without hurting anything. So to mount the radios inside the console, at one point I was thinking about making sort of an MDF frame that would go in here that I could bolt the radios to. Now at some point I actually may still do that, especially if I decide to put in a third radio in here, which may happen at some point in the future. But for right now, I was looking things over and I realized that this is sort of a double-walled arrangement, meaning that the plastic of the inside of the console is not shared with the outside. So what I think I can do is just put little short stubby screws into the side of the console here to hold the radio brackets in place. I'm going to put the 2-meter radio along the passenger side wall, and I'll put the CB radio along the driver's side wall. So part of the reason for that placement is that the 2-meter radio is just a little bit shallower than the CB radio, and because the console is deeper on this side, the CB radio just fits a little bit better over here. I'll also be using the 2-meter radio more than the CB radio, and when I'm in driving position, it's easier to see the 2-meter radio when it's a little bit further away. The mounting bracket for this radio can be positioned so that the radio can be angled a little bit away from the wall, so it should be easy to see when I'm driving if I need to glance over quickly and look at the display on the radio for some reason. Typically, if I'm going to be using the CB radio, this is probably going to be tuned to one channel, and I'm just going to be listening as I'm driving. If I'm ever going to use it to like talk to anybody or rag chew, I'll probably be pulled over and parked somewhere, so it won't matter. So I'm going to get the CB radio mounted in first. I'm just going to kind of orient it here inside the console so that it's not too far down, but also not too far up. One of the things I need to consider is this microphone connector and the fact that that's going to stick up a little bit. I want to be able to close the console without having to unplug the mic each time. So I forgot to shoot a video clip showing these right-angled PL259 adapters that I used on the back of the radio. Because the radios are mounted vertically in the console, I had a little bit of a clearance issue when trying to plug the PL259 connectors on the ends of the coax straight into the back of the radios. They fit, but the coax cable was bent at almost a 90-degree angle right at the base of the PL259. Now, luckily, I already had a couple of these adapters in my collection of connectors, so I was able to grab those and install them on the back of the radios so that I could plug the PL259 connectors on the ends of the coax straight into the female part of these adapters and then thread the male part into the back of the radio. And that prevented me having to kink the coax or route it at a sharper bend than I really wanted to. As you can see here, I've got the brackets mounted to both sides of the console. So I'll get the radios mounted in, and then I'll work my way forward and neaten up and secure all the wiring. I've got the radios all powered up and sort of mounted in here. Things are a little bit loose and out of place because, as you may be able to see, I've got some test equipment here ready to test out the antennas. All the power wires are routed and tucked in here fairly neat, not perfect, but close enough. I'll probably be pulling these in and out over time, so I wasn't going to get too fussy with it. But under the dash where wires could come loose and get caught on feet and cause problems, especially behind the pedals here, I've got everything neatly tucked away and zip tied in place so it can't fall out. So as you can see, the main power wire comes up from behind the antenna and the fender and routes through under the hood. I did find that it was a little close to a pinch point here, so I popped a hole in this plastic cover, put a zip tie through to hold it in place. Now it should stay there out of the way and not be a problem. As you can see, the fuse block is right here, and it tucks neatly down in here so it's out of the way. And I've got ring terminals crimped onto the wires and then bolted down to each of the battery posts, as you can see. So now it's time to mount and tune the antennas. I'm going to start over here on the driver's side with the CB antenna first, and then we'll move over to the other side and install the 2-meter antenna. So the antenna that I'm going to use is this old 4-foot Firestick 2 CB antenna. Now I've had this thing probably since the late 90s, and I'm not sure if it even works, but I guess we're going to find out together. So these antennas are tunable. There's a rubber cap on the very end that hides a set screw. So I'll pull this off. You can see there's a brass screw sticking out here and then sort of a lock nut here. So installing the Firestick is pretty simple. All I have to do is thread it into the mount. For now, I'm just going to leave this hand tight until I get everything tuned to where I want, and then I'll tighten it up with a wrench so it doesn't go anywhere. Now that I have the antenna mounted, I'm going to check the SWR with the built-in SWR function of this President McKinley CB radio. Now, a lot of the higher-end CB radios will have a built-in SWR meter where you can measure the SWR. The SWR function on this radio works a little bit different, and actually makes it a little easier to tune an antenna than a traditional SWR meter. Now, having said all that, I don't really know how accurate the SWR function in the radio is, but it should be close enough. So first up, I'm going to set the radio into the SWR test mode on channel 1. And you can see what we're getting now is sort of a beeping noise coming from the speaker. And there's a number 32 on the screen. What that means right now is that on channel 1, the SWR is 3.2. Now the beeping is sort of an audible tone to let you know whether the SWR is high or low, in case you're not looking physically at the meter. So having said all that, I'm going to note that the SWR is 3.2 on channel 1. I'll tune to channel 40 and check it here as well. So on channel 40, we can see that the SWR is 2.0, and the radio is beeping a little bit faster than it was on channel 1. So if you're not familiar with SWR, it's basically a ratio of radiated power versus reflected power. And the higher the measured number, the worse we are. Now the goal is to get to 1.0. And as we saw on channel 40, we're at 2.0. And on channel 1, we were 3.2. And that's a little higher than I'd like to see it. Now ideally we'd like to get to 1.0, but realistically anything around 1.5 should be usable. So taking the numbers into consideration, the SWR was 2.0 on 40 and 3.2 on channel 1. That means it was better on the higher channel or higher frequency. What that means is that the antenna probably needs to be lengthened a little bit. It's just a little bit too short to resonate properly in the CB band. So what I'm going to do is pull the antenna off and adjust that set screw to try and lengthen the antenna. So I'm just going to loosen this bottom nut, and then I'm going to bring the adjusting screw as far out as I can without it actually falling out. So now I'll put it back on the mount, check the SWR again. So I'm going to pop this rubber cap back over the adjuster screw. So taking a look at channel 1, you can see we're bouncing around between 1.6 and 1.8. So we're definitely going in the right direction. It's still not quite as good as I'd like to see it though. Let's check channel 40 and see what that looks like. You can see on channel 40 we're at 1.4. Again, I'd like it to be lower, but this isn't bad. Now just for fun, I'm going to check the SWR on channel 20. and see what we get there. So on channel 20, we're looking at 1.4 here as well. And now I've grabbed the stainless steel lock washer, and I'm going to put this back on the mount. So I've got a 16 millimeter for the base. A 5/8 was just a tiny bit too small, even though I think it should have been a 5/8. And I've got a 1/2 inch wrench for the fire stick. So now I'll just tighten this up, and we should be good to start mounting the 2-meter antenna. So just like the fire stick, I've had my 2-meter antenna for quite a while. This is a base-loaded 5/8 wave 2-meter antenna. I don't know if it was a brand name or not, but there's nothing on it here indicating what it might be. But it's always worked pretty well in the past, so I think I'm going to throw it on here and see how it does. So the mount on this side is an Nmo mount. It's a little bit different than the 3/8, but still the same idea. All I really have to do is thread the antenna on. Okay, so now I'll just bring the base of the antenna in and thread it over the mount. Now I will mention that these are made of brass and they're a little bit soft. I've had trouble in the past with cross-threading them and then getting them stuck in the base of the antenna. So I'm going to go slow and be careful and make sure that I don't do that here. Now with this antenna, there's no tools to help tighten it. I found that just tightening it up as much as I can by hand is plenty of torque to keep it seated in there, and it won't loosen up over time. So now we'll check the SWR on the ham antenna. Now the ham radio doesn't have that fancy SWR feature built into it, so I need an external meter to check it. And as you can see, I've got an MFJ 872 to do that. I've got the radio tuned to a simplex frequency at the bottom end of the band. I've got the meter set to the SWR calibration mode, and what I'm going to do now is key the radio up on low power and adjust this knob on the meter until the needle lines up with the cal mark on the end of the meter. Now I'll flip the switch over to SWR, key the radio again, and note the reading on the meter. So as you can see in the meter, the SWR was somewhere around 1.4. So not too bad. Now I'm going to punch in a frequency more toward the middle of the band, and we'll check it there. Looks like it might even be a little lower here towards the middle of the band. Now I'll go to the high end and we'll see what we get. And up there at the top of the band, it looks like it was just a touch higher, closer to like what it was at the low end of the band. So that tells me that this antenna is tuned right about where I want it to be. I don't even have to touch it. But if I did need to adjust it, what I would do is loosen the Allen head set screws that are down here at the base, and then just move this rod up and down a little bit to change the length of the antenna, and then recheck the SWR to see where I'm at. So all that's left now is to just tidy everything up and put the trim pieces back in place. And then I think we're done. So that's pretty much going to wrap things up for installing a CB and a ham radio in this 2007 Chevy Suburban. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to leave a comment or subscribe, feel free to do that as well. If you'd like to support my channel in another way, please consider taking a look at my Amazon store, which is linked in the description below. Thanks for watching.